Picture a lone driver standing outside a grand hotel in the biting cold of a New York winter. The streetlights reflecting off puddles of melted snow as the city hums around him, indifferent to his quiet waiting. His name is Jack, a single dad with tired eyes and calloused hands, holding a small sign that reads, Ms. Claire, in neat letters, the paper trembling slightly in the cold breeze. Jack doesn't belong here. Not among marble columns and glass doors that swing open for men in tailored suits and women in fur-lined coats who don't even glance at the driver with the sign. The driver with second-hand shoes and a $5 haircut he gave himself in his bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. to save money for his daughter's school lunch. They call him invisible, though they don't say it out loud, and he's learned to lower his eyes and swallow the bitter taste of being overlooked. Have you ever felt unseen, standing in a world that tells you your worth is measured by your clothes, your paycheck, your last name? Stay with me. You won't believe what happened next. As Jack shifts his weight, trying to keep warm, a sleek black limousine pulls up, the kind that costs more than Jack makes in a year, and the driver rushes around to open the door. Out steps a woman in a dark wool coat, her hair tied back, eyes sharp and tired at the same time. The kind of eyes that have seen too much boardroom betrayal and too many lonely nights. Her name is Claire, though Jack doesn't know that yet. And in this moment, she is just another client he has to drive across the city, another person who will sit in the back seat, talking on the phone, never once seeing him. But as she steps toward him, her heel catches on a crack in the pavement, and for a brief, fragile second, she stumbles, her eyes widening, the facade slipping. Jack steps forward without thinking, catching her elbow to steady her, and for that heartbeat, their eyes meet, and something unspoken passes between them, something raw and human that neither of them expected. She clears her throat, straightening her coat, nodding once and says, "Thank you," the words so quiet they almost disappear in the wind. Jack just nods back, his hand dropping to his side, and opens the door for her, helping her in with the quiet dignity of a man who has nothing to prove, nothing to hide, a man who knows that kindness is not a currency, but a calling. But what neither of them knows is that this small moment, the single act of steadying her in the cold, will lead them both into a night that neither will ever forget, a night where a single dad driver will find himself standing in a dining hall of the rich and powerful, and what he says at that dinner will silence a room full of people who have never been told the truth by someone with nothing to lose. Jack drove through the silent streets, the city lights painting streaks of gold and white across the windshield, as Claire sat in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the blur of buildings rushing by, her fingers tapping nervously against her phone, though she never unlocked it. Jack watched her through the mirror, seeing the way her shoulders were tense beneath that expensive coat, the way she bit her lower lip, like she was holding back words no one else would understand. He didn't speak, didn't break the quiet that settled between them, because silence was something Jack had learned to respect. As a single dad raising a daughter alone, Jack knew the weight of unspoken worries, the ones that pressed on your chest in the middle of the night when the world was asleep, the fear that you might not be enough, that tomorrow might bring another bill you couldn't pay, another moment where you had to choose between your dreams and your child's needs. Jack had once dreamed of owning his own garage, a small place with warm light and the smell of motor oil, where he could teach his daughter how to fix things, how to build something with her hands and know it would last. But dreams like that cost more than Jack could afford, so he traded them for reality, for long hours behind the wheel, for cold coffee and secondhand jackets, for moments with his daughter in the morning before school, where she would hug him so tightly he would close his eyes and promise himself it was all worth it. Stay with me. Because Claire, the woman in the back seat, was nothing like the world imagined her to be. People saw her name on the magazines, on the glass towers she built, and they whispered about power, about cold ambition, about a woman who cared only for success. But they didn't see the way she sat alone in her office at midnight, staring at a photo of her mother she kept hidden in a drawer, a mother who had died when Claire was just 15, leaving her to navigate a world that demanded she become unbreakable. Claire had learned to hide her softness, to wear sharp heels and sharper words, to sit across from men who tried to take what was hers and smile as she told them no. But beneath the strength was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones when you realize that every victory comes with another battle, that every room you walk into demands you prove yourself again and again. That night, as Jack drove her to her apartment, she finally spoke, her voice quiet, almost lost in the hum of the heater. Do you ever feel like you're living a life you didn't choose? Jack's eyes flicked to the mirror, meeting hers for a moment, seeing the vulnerability she tried to hide. Every day, he said softly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She looked away, her reflection in the glass of the window showing a woman who looked nothing like the headlines, a woman who was just tired of fighting alone. The next morning, Claire called Jack again, asking him to drive her to a meeting across town. He arrived early, waiting outside with a coffee in hand, and when she stepped out of the building, she paused, looking at him with surprise as he held out the coffee. You look like you could use this, he said, a small, genuine smile on his lips. For a moment, Claire just stood there, the cold air swirling around her, and then she took the cup, her fingers brushing against his, warmth spreading through her hands. Thank you, she whispered, and Jack nodded, helping her into the car, the moment passing like a fragile promise neither of them dared to name. Over the next few days, Jack became more than just a driver. He became a quiet presence in Claire's chaotic world, someone who didn't flinch when she snapped in frustration after a call with the board, someone who would turn the radio to her favorite song without asking, someone who would simply say, "You're doing your best," on the days she felt like she was failing. Have you ever met someone who saw you when you didn't even see yourself? Someone who made you believe, even for a moment, that you weren't alone? Claire found that in Jack, and Jack in return found himself looking forward to those quiet moments when she would laugh softly at one of his dry jokes, when she would thank him in that quiet voice that told him she wasn't used to kindness without conditions. But what neither of them knew was that everything was about to change, because Claire had been invited to a high-profile dinner with investors, a dinner that would decide the future of her company, and she needed Jack to drive her there. She promised him it would be just another job, that he could wait outside, but fate had other plans. Because that night, Jack would find himself sitting at a table surrounded by the powerful and the ruthless, and what he would say in that room would silence everyone, changing the course of both their lives forever. Jack pulled the car up to the curb outside the towering glass building, the lights above reflecting like 100 eyes watching him as Claire stepped out, her black dress catching the glow of the streetlights, her hair pinned back with a single silver clip, her eyes holding that familiar mix of exhaustion and determination. She turned back to him, her breath visible in the cold air, and said, "You don't have to wait. This might take a while." Jack looked at her, seeing the way her fingers gripped her clutch a little too tightly, the way her shoulders squared as if bracing for a battle, and he simply nodded. But he didn't leave. He parked around the corner, watching the revolving doors swallow her into a world he would never belong to, a world of crystal glasses and polished shoes, of men with cold smiles and words that cut deeper than knives. He didn't know why he stayed, why he kept the engine running as the minutes turned to hours, the heater clicking in the quiet, the hum of the city pressing against the windows. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him that morning, accepting the coffee with a soft "thank you" that seemed to mean more than the words themselves. Or maybe it was the way she had asked, "Do you ever feel like you're living a life you didn't choose?" And he couldn't lie when he said, "Every day." Jack leaned back, closing his eyes, picturing his daughter sleeping in the small bed back home, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm. The promise he made to her every night that he would be there in the morning, that he would always find a way to keep going. The promise he made to himself, that he wouldn't let the world take his kindness, that he wouldn't let it harden him, no matter how many doors closed in his face. The hours slipped by until his phone buzzed, Claire's name lighting up the screen. A simple message. "Can you come in for a moment?" Jack frowned, sitting up, his heart thumping in his chest as he locked the car and walked toward the entrance, the doorman's eyes narrowing as he approached. But before the man could say a word, Claire appeared, her eyes searching, her hand reaching for Jack's arm as if to anchor herself. "They want to meet you," she said, her voice tight, her smile brittle. "Just for a moment, please." He wanted to ask why, wanted to understand, but he saw something in her eyes, something that looked too much like fear, so he nodded, letting her lead him into the golden-lit lobby, past people in suits and dresses that cost more than his car, past the whispers and the glances that followed them as they moved through the crowd. Have you ever stepped into a place and felt the air shift? Felt the weight of every eye turning toward you, measuring, judging, waiting for you to prove that you didn't belong? Jack felt it as they entered the dining hall, the chandeliers casting warm light over tables set with silver cutlery and crystal glasses, the laughter that bubbled around the room, though faltering as people noticed him, the single dad in a faded suit jacket, shoes that had seen too many winters, standing next to the woman they all knew as the ice queen of the boardroom. Claire led him to a table near the front, where a group of men and women in dark suits sat, their eyes sharp, their smiles tight, the kind of people who didn't waste words unless they were weapons. One of them, a man with slicked back hair and a watch that glittered under the light, leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking over Jack with thinly veiled disdain. "And this is?" he asked, the words slicing the air like a cold breeze. Claire's hand tightened on Jack's arm, but before she could speak, Jack stepped forward, offering his hand, his voice steady. "Jack, I drive for Claire." The man's eyebrows lifted, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "A driver? How quaint." The others at the table chuckled softly, the sound like glass breaking, and Jack felt the heat rising in his neck. But he didn't flinch, didn't look away. He had stood in the cold outside too many schools, waiting for his daughter to come out, hearing other parents whisper about the man with the second-hand jacket, the man who didn't quite fit in. He had learned how to let the words pass over him, how to stand tall even when the world tried to push him down. "Jack is more than a driver," Claire said, her voice calm but shaking at the edges. "He's here tonight because I trust him." The man in the suit laughed, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Trust him? Claire, we're discussing millions of dollars tonight, the future of your company, and you brought your driver?" His laughter spread around the table, the others joining in, the sound echoing in Jack's ears. But then it faded as Claire's voice cut through the noise. "Yes," she said simply, and the table fell silent for a moment. But then the man leaned back, shaking his head, the smirk never leaving his face. "You've always been sentimental, Claire. It will ruin you." Jack looked at her, seeing the flush on her cheeks, the way her eyes shone under the chandelier, and something in him snapped, something that had been waiting for too long to be said, too long to be heard. He stepped forward, his voice calm but strong, the kind of voice that came from a place deeper than anger, a place where truth lived. "You laugh because you think you're untouchable," Jack said, his eyes meeting the man's, holding steady. "You sit here in your suits, drinking wine that costs more than a month of rent for people like me, and you think it makes you better. But let me tell you something." The room grew quiet, the music in the background fading, as people turned to listen, their conversations halting, their eyes fixed on the man who wasn't supposed to speak, the driver who wasn't supposed to matter. "I see more honesty in a diner at 5 a.m. than I see in rooms like this," Jack continued, his voice never rising, but each word hitting like a hammer. "I see mothers working 2 jobs to keep the lights on, fathers skipping meals so their kids can eat, neighbors helping neighbors when the system forgets them. You think money makes you powerful, but all it does is make you forget what matters." The man's smile faded, his eyes narrowing, but Jack didn't stop. "Rich or poor, we all leave the same way. The only difference is how many people we leave better than we found them." Claire's breath caught, her eyes shining as she looked at him, and for a moment, the entire room was silent, the kind of silence that comes after a storm, heavy with the weight of words that cannot be taken back. Jack felt his heart pounding, his hands trembling slightly as the truth settled around them, the truth that he had carried in his chest for so long, the truth that no amount of money could buy. And then, as quickly as it had fallen, the moment shattered, the sound of a single clap breaking the silence, and then another and another, until the room was filled with applause. Hesitant at first, but growing stronger. People standing, their eyes on Jack, the driver who had reminded them of something they had forgotten, something they had buried under ambition and greed. But as the applause echoed in his ears, Jack's eyes found Claire's. And in that moment, he saw the tears on her cheeks, the smile that broke across her face, the kind of smile that came from a place deeper than gratitude, a place where hope lived. Have you ever seen someone remember who they were meant to be, in a single moment, in a single breath? That was what happened to Claire that night. And to Jack, the single dad who thought he was just driving a client to a dinner, who didn't know that his words would change everything. But what Jack didn't know was that this was only the beginning. That what Claire would do next would take everything he thought he knew and turn it upside down. And the choice she would make would bring them both to a crossroads they could never have imagined. The applause faded, replaced by the soft hum of conversation returning to the room. But something had shifted, something real, something that left a glow in the air like the warmth of dawn after a long, cold night. Jack stood there, breathing heavily, hands still trembling from the weight of what he had just spoken into a room that was never meant to hear voices like his. He turned to Claire, who was still seated, her eyes locked on him, tears drying on her cheeks. But her expression was different now. It wasn't the guarded, polished look of a CEO trying to survive in a world of sharks. It was something raw, something true, something like freedom. She stood, pushing back her chair slowly, the legs scraping softly against the marble floor as she walked toward him. For a moment, the room seemed to fall away, the chandeliers and the crystal glasses, the murmurs and the watchful eyes, all dissolving into the background as she reached him. "Jack," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Thank you." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could find the words, the man with the slicked back hair, the one who had mocked him, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You have guts," the man said, his eyes narrowing. But there was a glint there now, something like reluctant respect. Not many people would dare to speak like that here. Jack held his gaze, steady, calm, refusing to shrink. "Maybe more people should," he replied softly. The man smirked, shaking his head, and turned away, leaving Jack and Claire standing there in the middle of a room that had finally fallen silent again, a silence that spoke louder than any words. Claire took a breath, her hands reaching for Jack's, gripping them tightly as she whispered, "I needed to hear that tonight. They needed to hear that." Jack searched her eyes, seeing the exhaustion, the fear, but also the spark of something he hadn't seen before. Hope. "Claire," he said quietly, "you don't have to keep proving yourself to them. You already have." Her eyes shimmered, the weight of years pressing against her shoulders. But in that moment, she let herself exhale, really exhale, as if she had been holding her breath for too long. "I've been fighting alone for so long, Jack," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "trying to keep my company, my people, my mother's legacy alive. And I forgot why I started." Jack squeezed her hands, grounding her. "Then maybe it's time to remember." And in that instant, a quiet decision formed in her eyes, a choice that would change everything. She turned to the table of investors who were now watching, waiting, and she spoke, her voice clear, strong. "This company will not be sold to men who only see profit and power. It was built to honor a promise, to create opportunities, to change lives. If you don't see that, then you are welcome to walk away." A stunned silence followed, the kind that feels like a held breath. And then one by one, some stood, shaking their heads, gathering their papers, leaving with cold nods. But others stayed, their eyes brighter, their respect real. And Claire knew then she had chosen the right path, even if it would be harder. She turned back to Jack, a soft, tired, but real smile breaking across her face. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this," she said. Jack shook his head, a small, warm laugh escaping him. "I think I was meant to be here tonight." She nodded, her eyes glistening, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Have you ever witnessed someone reclaim themselves piece by piece in front of you? It's something you never forget. Jack, the single dad who thought he was just driving a client, had become the voice that reminded a room full of power what it meant to care, to remember, to choose something bigger than fear. But what neither of them knew was that this moment was just the beginning, that the next step they would take together would change everything they thought they knew about courage, about kindness, about love, and about the quiet, unstoppable power of standing up for what truly matters. The night air was crisp when they stepped outside, the glow of the city wrapping around them as if to remind them that despite everything, life was still moving, still breathing, still waiting for those who dared to live it fully. Claire stood beside Jack on the sidewalk, her heels clicking softly as she shifted, the tension of the evening slowly melting from her shoulders, replaced by something calmer, something lighter. Jack glanced at her, his hands in the pockets of his worn coat, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "You did the right thing in there," he said softly, his breath clouding in the cold. Claire looked at him, really looked, her eyes reflecting the streetlights, the quiet strength she had tried so hard to hide finally settling into her posture. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her voice steady, but her eyes shimmering with emotion. Jack shook his head, a small laugh escaping him. "You've had it in you all along, Claire. You just needed to remember." She smiled, a real smile, the kind that starts small but grows, warming even the coldest nights. And in that moment, she looked less like the CEO the world saw and more like the woman she truly was. A woman who had fought alone for too long and was finally allowing herself to accept help, to accept hope. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a photo his neighbor had sent. A picture of his daughter, asleep on the couch, her favorite book open on her chest, the blanket slipping from her small shoulders. A wave of emotion hit him, the reminder of why he did everything he did, why he woke up before the sun, why he worked until his hands ached, why he kept moving even when the world tried to tell him he wasn't enough. Claire noticed the way his eyes softened, the way his shoulders dropped, and she reached out, touching his arm lightly. "You're a good father, Jack," she whispered, and he swallowed hard, nodding. "I try," he replied. "Have you ever met someone who reminded you why you keep fighting, even when the world feels too heavy? Someone who, in the quietest moments, makes you believe that kindness still matters, that courage doesn't always look like loud victories, but sometimes like small acts of truth in a room full of silence?" That was Jack, the single dad who showed up, who spoke up, who reminded a room of powerful people that humanity was not something to be traded for profit. That was Claire, the woman who finally chose to believe in herself, to remember the promise she made to her mother, to stand for something bigger than fear. As they stood there under the streetlights, the world around them moving, breathing, living, they both knew this was not the end of their story, but the beginning. Jack turned to Claire, a small, determined smile on his face. "So," he said, "where to next?" She looked at him, her eyes bright, her laughter soft as she replied, "Wherever we're needed." And in that moment, under the glow of a city that never sleeps, they stepped forward, not as a CEO and her driver, not as a billionaire and a single dad, but as two people who chose to believe in the power of truth, in the quiet courage of kindness, and in the unspoken promise that together, they could change the world, one small act at a time. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that even the smallest voices can make the loudest impact, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to our story family for more stories that give hope, remind us who we are, and who we can still choose to become. This is just one story, but it won't be the last because your courage can change everything.